A good outcome for a team that is working extremely hard to both get the most out of this car every weekend and also to make sure that the car is improving weekend on weekend, which so far we've been able to do. So what are our main takeaways from the weekend down under? I think overall, a sense of quiet satisfaction that we have moved the car forward, that from a performance point of view, we probably got about as much as it is able to give right now. That happiness, of course, is tempered by the disappointment that we only got one to the flag and that George was not able to show what he was capable of in the car on race day, having performed very strongly up to that point in the weekend. We didn't have huge breakthroughs, but we moved forward a little bit. We put a small amount on the leaders, Red Bull, and we're starting to get on terms with and maybe just nose a whisker in front of the Ferraris and the Aston Martin. Was the performance in Australia expected, or was it track specific, or was it things we've done to the car? Well, that's always a very difficult question to answer. I think, was it expected? Broadly, yes, because actually the performance level in Australia was not markedly different to that in the other two tracks so far this year. Different, yes, to Red Bull, but not completely different animal compared to the rest of the field. I think probably the biggest shift in Australia was actually that Red Bull were a little bit more off form in qualifying compared to the rest of the grid, and that sort of closed up the grid. But if you look at the relative pace of our car to the Ferrari, our car to the Aston Martin, well, it's been close-ish all year. And yes, we're a little bit on the better side, but it wasn't seismic. So was it expected? Well, we expected to be in the fight with Ferrari and Aston Martin, and pleasing just to have our noses in front, but we did expect to be there. How much of the overall good result at the weekend was track specific and how much came from things we did? Well, I guess time will tell. We'll go to some more very different tracks in the next few weeks, and we'll see whether this was the sort of initial bellwether of a general uptick in our performance, which we hope, or whether it was related to the quite unusual track conditions that we saw this weekend in Melbourne. Why did we choose to bring George into the pits under the yellow flag conditions? It's a good question, because it was, I think, quite early in the race. It was around lap 8 or so. Now, that early in the race, it's right on the cusp of whether a safety car stop is going to help you out or leave you a little bit worse off. And so you can see that when that happened, we chose to split our cars. We brought George in, but left Lewis out, because at that point, it's very finely balanced whether you're going to get a benefit from the stop or not. And by bringing one in and not the other, then you're sort of splitting your risk. It's like an each-way bet. As it happens, it actually looked post that decision that we probably did the right thing with George to bring him in just from a pure getting the best out of a cheap pit stop under the safety car. But all that was rendered completely null and void when the red flag was then pulled out just a few seconds later. Now, we were very surprised by that red flag, because to us that looked like the sort of incident that could have been cleared up under a yellow. The moment that it goes red, then although you've got a cheap stop under a safety car, it's nothing like as good as the free stop you get under a red flag. So I think the decision stands on the merits that we were considering when we made it, but obviously once the red flag came out, then it clearly meant that George lost out a little bit. If George hadn't DNF'd, then what could have been the optimal result? He was obviously a little ill-served by that red flag, lost a few slots on the grid instead of benefiting from the safety car stop that we hoped we would give to him. But he would have had a strong race. He'd showed good pace all the way through the weekend, good in qualifying, strong start, good race pace, and was set fair for a good result, even if he had been ill-served by the fortune of the red flag. How are the team feeling after Lewis's P2, and will Baku be the same as Melbourne? Well, simple answer is the team is completely delighted with that P2, the whole team completely delighted. Tempered a little bit, of course, as I mentioned earlier, by the fact that it was painful watching our car with George expire, but Lewis drove a absolutely tremendous, very clean, very faultless race. Brilliant first lap, good start, and lovely battle in those first few corners with Verstappen. And thereafter, just a calm, controlled race under very tricky conditions where it would have been very, very easy to overstep what you ask of the tyres and then send them off into a sort of death spiral with graining. So really, really good drive. Fantastic result for us to get a second place on merit, with the gap to the front being much reduced compared to the previous races. A good outcome for a team that is working extremely hard to both get the most out of this car every weekend and also to make sure that the car is improving weekend on weekend, which so far we've been able to do. Will Baku be similar or the same as Melbourne? That is a very difficult question to answer. They're very different tracks. Where Melbourne had been front limited, putting more strain on the front axle, probably Baku will be rear limited. So it's a very, very different set of circumstances. I think we've got some reasons to think that as we keep working on our car, we will be able to make the hop from Melbourne to the different challenge of Baku and still have a good showing. But it will be only when we get there and put the car on the road that we will know that for sure. Are the teams allowed to develop the car across the Easter break? And if we are, then what are going to be our focuses for our development? Simple answer is yes, of course we are. There are 2 official break periods for the sport where we're not allowed to develop the car, and those are in the summer, and then new for this year, also at Christmas. The Easter break is a working period like any other. What will we be doing? Well, we'll be doing the normal things. We'll be working as hard as we can in the wind tunnel to find more downforce. We will be working as hard as we can in the drawing office to convert the things that the wind tunnel found a few weeks ago into performance that we deliver to the track. We'll be working in the drawing office also to bring some mechanical parts to the car, some different suspension components that we think will help the underlying balance of the car and make it a more drivable thing, making it something that the drivers have more confidence to push right to the limits. And we'll be working on the normal sort of simulation loop and routine that allow us to prepare for the race weekends that are coming up, making sure that we land the car in the right place when we get to the race. Big deal at Baku. It's the first sprint race of the weekend, and sprint races really reward the teams that can land there with a starting setup that is pretty on the money and ready to go in qualifying, because the time is really compressed in a sprint race weekend. So those are the things we'll be working on, and hopefully we'll work well and strong and have a good showing when we show up in Baku in just a few weeks' time.